So welcome to Anita Erskine's MCM Defense. I'm Terry Flynn. I'll be the chair of the defense today, along with her supervisor, Dr. Alex Sevigny, and second reader, Professor Dave Sevigny, Dave Schultz.
Wow.
It's been a long day. And the process is that Anita will have 25 minutes to present her research. And then the committee will have 25 minutes to ask questions. Once all the questions are exhausted, we will put everybody but the panel in a breakout room, and we will deliberate, and then we will bring Anita, the candidate, back to provide our verdict on your presentation in your defense. So without further ado, it's 4:02 my time. You have until 4:27. You're on the clock.
So hello, everyone. My name is Anita Erskine. I am a proud member of the MCM Cohort 14 group. Today I'm walking you through essentially what inspired this project. You'll also see a summary of the literature review, why I selected the participants in both my documentary and, of course, in my research generally. How I did the research, interviewed them, summary of the results, recommendations, ways forward. You catch a glimpse of the documentary, and then my big thank yous. So the reality of it all is, listen, I'm a late bloomer. But in this instance, when I started my MCM course, that late bloomer was becoming someone who was very conscious of every single thing that was happening around me. I was beginning to understand that COVID wasn't just COVID, but because I work with women, I was also hearing a lot of stories around women who were facing so many different kinds of abuse during the pandemic. I was in Africa at the time, but I was also feeling the repercussions of George Floyd's tragic death. Everyone was beginning to say enough is enough. We were beginning to find the texture of our voices. And in neighboring Canada, Joyce Ishahuan, of course, First Nations woman, had just filmed the most horrific treatment that she'd received from healthcare providers, and she died only a few hours later. So in essence, I was coming into a course that was designed to enable experienced mid-career communications executives and professionals to acquire critical management and advanced strategic communications abilities. But it wasn't enough. I was becoming the student who was looking for this course to empower me, to allow me, give me the communication skills required so I could go out into the world and perhaps change it. Passionate about women's empowerment, experienced media professional, perspective on race and gender, love to tell stories, love to build communities. So what really inspired this moment when I had to choose what topic to do for my capstone was guided by that intersection. I had acquired communication skills from this course. And because of COVID, and because of all the things that had happened in 2020, I also felt I needed to do something to change my community. And so I decided to highlight what these women, as you can see on the screen, had done, who they were, what their efforts meant for the global voice of women. And I chose to focus my capstone research on women owning the narrative, storytelling and creative control as a driving force for social change. Why did I choose colored women? Because I am a colored woman. Why did I focus on Black women? Because I am a Black woman. And ultimately, why did I choose women based in Canada, based in Toronto? Because I used to live in Toronto. And they told me about their experiences, and I realized that, oh my goodness, I too had faced some of those experiences. The essence of what I like to call my literature review was to look at a variety of areas. So I started off by understanding what mass media's influence is, as far as talking about representation, talking about unconscious bias. So I recognize that the pivotal role of mass media in shaping public perceptions and consciousness, particularly in the context of unconscious bias and representation, is really in the groundwork for empowering Black women with narratives that challenge stereotypes and drive social change. The legacy of historical figures for me was essential. There was no way that I could have a research document or a research project or documentary without highlighting the contributions of some historical figures. Because after all, we're talking about something that was happening to Black women. It's happening to Black women. But it didn't start in 2020. It didn't start in this century. It started years before us. So it was essential for me as part of my literature review to go back and look at the legacy of activism and media advocacy within the Black community. Systemic barriers in the industry. Now, let's not even focus on what only Black women have faced. Let's talk about what Black people in general. But thankfully, I was able to kind of hone in on Black women in film and media industry and, looking at that element of what they have had to face. A lot of women having to face, walking to places where their color automatically is, I would say, the biggest thing that eliminates them from even the opportunity of pursuing their ambitions. The global perspective on gender equity was important for me because I couldn't only talk about the essence of Blackness. I also had to talk about the essence of being a woman. And of course, if I was going to have a conversation about being a woman, I wasn't only going to look at perhaps just Canada or America or Europe. I was going to make it a global perspective. And thankfully, in doing that, I also realized that indeed, when you look at the film and media industry, quite a lot of women face the same problems. There isn't, or there are opportunities for women, but those opportunities aren't given to them clearly because of bias. Why did I choose the women in this documentary, in this project? It's because these are women whose professional ambition clearly disrupts the status quo. Whatever has happened to them doesn't stay at their level of their experience. They come out of it hoping to make life better for others by speaking up and by being a lot more active when it comes to issues around them. These women are also on a mission to create ecosystems where women can grow, or essentially, in some instances, where Black or colored people can grow. They are mentors and they are community builders. They contribute to building organizations that focus on empowering minorities. And these are the categories I paid particular attention to when choosing my participants. So very quickly, Dr. Rita Deverell, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go straight to her action. And I break it down into mission, ambition, and action because these women are part of a group of women who understand the value of not just their voice, the value of their experience, but who know that based on what has happened to them, it is essential for them to pave the way for others. And in Dr. Deverell's instance, or in her case, she paved the way by pioneering work in broadcasting by founding Vision TV, designed to give colored people, designed to give First Nations people an opportunity to showcase their talent on television. Joan Jenkinson, her action was spearheading initiatives such as the Black Screen Office that doesn't only give colored people an opportunity to showcase their work, but also helps to build the machinery, the business behind film and media, specifically for colored talent and colored creatives. Tanya Williams, now she founded and leads Real World Screen Institution, Film Festival, and Foundation. She's been doing this since 2000, and her essence, her action, the basis of her action was to ensure that colored people of different types and different cultures, Chinese, Indian, whatever kind of culture that you can qualify as colored people, were having a place to showcase their work, and were also having an opportunity, or had an opportunity, to interact with other people they could look up to for the necessary guidance in making sure that their work reached the world for which it was created, or for which it is created. Shireen Francis is a wonderful young filmmaker, and her action really, and Shireen said, she's going straight to the opportunity, or to the essence of talking about issues facing Black women. So her action really has been to create content for television, talk shows, etc., to allow influential leaders and entrepreneurs, etc., to talk about their experiences. Trey Anthony, writing and producing groundbreaking works such as The Kink in My Hair. Trey's experience, as she describes in the long form of the documentary, is such that Trey, being a woman of Black origin, was eager to bring stories about her family, her mother, to the stage. And it wasn't something that was easily done, because obviously it wasn't something that was being done before she did it. So her action was to ensure that that mold was broken by bringing The Kink in My Hair on the stage in Toronto, and of course, eventually around the world. Ella Cooper, she founded Black Women Film Canada, and Ella is one of the main reasons I was able to access all the women in this documentary. I had mentored some of Ella's participants in a residency, and through that, I realized that this was a fantastic place and a fantastic opportunity for me to tap into her network to help build my MCM Capstone project. Last but not the least, Julie Black. Now, Julie, as a musician and actress, and everything else in between, as someone may define her, co-founded and is a keynote speaker for Women's Empowerment Summits, and she advocates for LGBTQ plus communities, etc. But most importantly, Julie Black is really focused on using her singing voice and her career as a musician, storytelling in that form, to change the narrative. Now, my research format was, it's one of the most complicated things I've ever had to do, because I built the questions, so about 14 questions, which I had to send to all these participants. You know, some of them had to change some of the questions because they felt it didn't really apply to them. But ultimately, I was able to ask a majority of them the questions in the questionnaire. And of course, these interviews were done virtually by Zoom and Teams. I didn't meet, and I still haven't met any of, well, with the exception of Ella Cooper, I still haven't met any of these wonderful women. We've only interacted virtually. I then had to transcribe all the interviews, which were each about, the least was about 35 minutes. So it was a lot of work transcribing all the interviews and then coding them according to the recurring themes in order for me to build the research results. So in moving into the research, I was eager to know, how do their personal experiences, or how their personal experiences and indeed their sociocultural backgrounds of the women in this documentary, the women in this project, how do these experiences influence their approach to how they mentor, to how they raise their voices or use their voices as advocates, to how they build foundations or build organizations to help other women of color. And what I realized in that first research question is almost all of them were keen on using their personal experiences as fuel for the work that they were doing for their communities. Specifically, Rita and Joan talked about the unconscious bias they faced as young Black women pursuing broadcast media careers. And when they got out, well, they never really have, but then in their maturity and with their influence have been able to build organizations that almost almost shield women of color, almost give women of color that quote unquote automatic access into the places they couldn't access when they were younger. In the instance of Tanya and Ella really focused on their experiences from a cultural perspective. The fact that they grew up in communities where they were almost always the only Black young girls or the only Black young women, and using that experience to build their individual organizations to ensure that the women that are coming after them don't have to be the only colored women or the only Black women in the rooms in which they may find themselves. My research question 2 was on the intersectionality and multidimensional representation in the works of Black women and how these works contribute to shaping and challenging industry narratives and stereotypes. And what I discovered is each participant does indeed demonstrate their work. They use their work to demonstrate how to challenge stereotypes. When it comes to film, Trey Anthony and Ella Cooper, etc., are really keen on demonstrating, on using the storylines to demonstrate the multifaceted look and feel of their cultural backgrounds. And, you know, when I was talking to Ella primarily, because she was my first point of contact, she talked a lot about representation. She talked a lot about growing up and not really being able to see anyone like her, being of mixed race, not really being able to have an opportunity to look up to anyone like her. So indeed, she used her work to establish the fact that she, everyone is essentially included in conversations on film and media. Research question number 3 was about the effective strategies and practices that I was not only discovering about these Black women in film and media, but also that broadly that they were using in creating inclusive spaces and platforms where voices could be heard, where minorities could feel included. Hoping to create that change or that social change in the industry. And yes, indeed, they, when it comes to the element of building place or building space for people of color, Tanya, Joan, in fact, all of them have had an opportunity to or contributed to building organizations that are specifically for people, minorities, or specifically for women of color or people of color. And that opportunity has allowed their various stakeholders, if I may call it that, or the people that are involved in the organizations or the enlisted or the people that they mentor, is allow them that confidence to understand and know that indeed they do have a place and they do have a voice. So yes, indeed, their work does create that form of feeling of inclusivity and create eventually, and will eventually create, the systemic change that we're collectively looking for. A few recommendations about this project. It was one of the most difficult things I have personally had to do. Now, the importance of building that flexibility of time, because I was also dealing with every single woman had a multitude of projects. They were very busy. So it literally took me just about a year to literally line all my interviews up. And that was really, really tough. I would like to also have an opportunity to look a little bit more into the history, which I didn't do much of. So the next time I do have an opportunity to do this, I really want an opportunity to look at the historical figures a little bit more and their impact on that generation of women that we're looking at currently. Better planning, because editing is quite intense, and that would have allowed me an opportunity to do a few cuts for review first before reaching the final one, even though the final one hasn't been reached yet. But ultimately, I just needed a little bit more time. And then ultimately to expand the research to other countries and continents to give this project a little bit more of a bigger appeal, if I may put it that way. So I have a few corrections to do. I have 4 more interviews lined up. A few directors had confirmed, but they were only available in 2024. I would like to re-edit the full format. I would love to release it to the McMaster community in July this summer, and then have an online release in October. So now I'm going to stop sharing my presentation and go to the documentary. Today, we embark on a journey through the lens of the groundbreaking Black women in film and media, trailblazers who are redefining narratives and reshaping an industry. From the silent echoes of overlooked voices to the roaring crescendo of empowered storytelling, these women are not just contributing to a conversation, they are leading it. They are mentors, advocates, and pioneers, challenging stereotypes and nurturing a future where representation transcends tokenism. Now, I like to refer to this collective as a powerful and purposeful group of cultural narrative professionals. They are directors, producers, screenwriters, playwrights, journalists, cinematographers, and actors. Without apology, armed by a deep sense of passion and a sense of responsibility toward their community, they have garnered attention and proposed solutions to the urgent need for equity, diversity, and inclusion for Black women, and in fact, women of color in the film and media spaces. My name is Anita Erskine. I am a storyteller, a communicator, and an advocate for change. Today, I embark on a journey to explore how storytelling and creative control serve as driving forces for social change, all from the unique vantage point of some of Canada's trailblazing women in media and film. You're welcome to the first in a series of short documentaries called Women Owning the Narrative, Storytelling and Creative Control as a Driving Force for Social Change.
When I very seriously was pursuing being an actor in the 1970s, I would actually get letters saying, from artistic directors, saying, we don't need any Black actors this season. Now, sometimes if I was feeling quite perky, I would write back and say, I am an actor who is Black. You do need some actors, don't you? However, I would say that this was not the defining thing for me, which is why I stopped being an actor only, is how powerless actors were and are. So when I fell into television, I discovered I could make things happen. And that was entirely a different concept. So were things bad? Yes, things were bad. Have things improved? Yes, they have. Have they improved in major, outstanding ways? Probably not.
When my career began, women of color, particularly Black women, were not dissimilar in position to what they are now. We are underrepresented in front of and behind the camera. We don't occupy key roles as writers, producers, directors, and lead actors. There was a recent study reviewed by Women in View about women, the performance of women in the film and television industries, and Black women were at the bottom of the rung, like with very few creative roles, certainly next to no decision-making roles, and receiving the least funding of any other women.
I think the struggle first started internally, just believing that I was good enough. You know, I've always had a firm self-confidence, but being in Canada without Black radio, without seeing Black women on TV that look like myself, without seeing actors or, you know, theater performers look like myself, without seeing lawyers and doctors look like myself, I really lived in this space where it's like, all things outside of my four walls, outside of my church, was white. And so it was like, really, how do I lay the pavement? How do I put down these breadcrumbs so that somebody else could also follow along in the future? So that was the first struggle, just making sure that I had a solid belief system when I left my household. And
there's nobody in Canadian media who is at a position of power to green light a show to put on a Canadian network. And that's just the truth, right? So that's why it's harder for us to get through the door.
I started Black Women Film Canada in 2016, and I wanted to create a professional level experience for Black women working in the industry that did not exist in Canada anywhere. I had delivered a lot of programs for our Black communities and underserved communities, and I found that while there was a lot of funds for youth, there was a lot of assumptions that it was Black youth who needs the big up. There wasn't a lot of programs at all for Black women in the industry when Black women came on the scene. Black women film came on the scene, to be exact. And in addition to that, prior to that, I had done a lot of research in my master's about representation of Black female bodies and of Black women identified people, and especially in relation to representation, Western visual culture, Canadian identities, all the stereotypes out there. And the history is, as people know, not a great history. And so I wanted to change that in different ways through my art, through the films I've created, but also I wanted to create a transformational program that would support the development of Black women in film and media. And it started in 2016 with TIFF, CBC, NFB, and a bunch of other industry partners who I went to and I said, I've got this idea, I've got this funding from the Ontario Arts Council, I want to do this leadership program. And what was once a really amazing leadership program that also took a group of Black women through TIFF, and it is now, a thriving not-for-profit organization, and we run at least 7 programs every year. We have a staff of 5, and we continue to grow and adapt to the needs of our community across Canada.
So I was already in my 40s when I started Real World. I had a good career. I was living I still am living in Los Angeles, and on the show The Young and the Restless, I'm making good money and my career is going well. But I would go back to Toronto or other parts of Canada. People would invite me to speak at different things, and all these young people would come up to me, and I'm in my 40s now, so I feel, I'm not a 20-something person. I'm a mature person, but they would be, how do they get to the States? They weren't asking me, how do I make a career? They weren't even thinking of Canada at all. And it made me sad to think that the opportunities that were not there for me when I was 16, 17, 18 in Canada, that made me make the move to the US, was still there, even in 2000. And that was the beginning of the impetus of me wanting to create something, some sort of platform. Because even though people ask me questions, I don't have the answers to everything. So I started Real World Film Festival. We did the first one in March of 2001. And my hope was, by lots of really professional, experienced people coming together, these young people, emerging people, mid-level people could come and hear not just from Tanya, but hear from all kinds of people in all kinds of levels of the industry, whether they're agents or managers, whether they're cinematographers, whether they're art directors, really to get a sense of this industry that I love so much.
I am hopeful that women of color and Indigenous women and all women will be able to aspire to the professions for which they have gifts and contributions to make. That the barriers to their achieving their greatest success are chipped away and chipped away and chipped away, and that they find wonderful colleagues and allies. I've been very fortunate with that in my life, and in fact always stress that when you have good colleagues and allies, that is gold. There is no better place for you to be. You don't have to look for the next promotion if you're in a great team. Make that great team last and be appreciated. So that's what I hope for them, not only in broadcasting, but in all other areas of activity as well.
The women featured in this documentary epitomize a power that doesn't apologize. Their individual and collective journeys have not only shattered barriers, but also rewritten the script of what is possible. Their bold and present voices have brought new perspectives to the forefront, challenging all of us to question norms and inspiring us to embrace change. Today, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to these remarkable women. Thank you so much for utilizing your creativity, your passion, and determination to spark conversations that drive social change. Your contributions have left the kind of mark on this documentary that will leave all of us rethinking who and why we are. To all those standing alongside them, raising their voices for equity, inclusion, and diversity, our commitment to you is to make sure that the world hears your voice. You've shown us that change indeed starts with that story, that conversation, and that movement. This new journey for me has begun to illuminate the profound impact of narratives as catalysts for change. So I humbly ask you to seize the power of your voice and unleash stories that challenge, provoke, and inspire. As far as I'm concerned, it seems to me that the world is finally ready to listen to those narratives that have been silenced for far too long. So, embrace your identity, embrace your experiences, embrace your vision. Speak boldly, because your words have the potential to reshape perceptions, rewrite histories, and forge a future brimming with equity, inclusion, and diversity. Remember that you're not just a witness to this evolution, you are an integral part of it, and you must take those reins. And don't forget, you must own your narrative. My name is Anita Erskine. See you next time.
So that brings me to the end of my presentation. A big thank you to all of you for listening. I went a little over time, I apologize. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I am really looking forward to showing you the full documentary sometime this year. Thank you.
Anita, that was amazing. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It was insightful and exciting at the same time. So, Dr. Stephanie, you can start us off.
Yes, thank you. And I just want to preface my comments by saying that it's been an absolute pleasure to work with you on this project. And as well, you're really one of the most efficient and professional capstone supervisees that I've ever worked with. You and I didn't waste any time on this, right? You spent every time on the creative side rather than the planning. And congratulations on a remarkable piece of visual academic work and visual storytelling. It's really, really good. And anybody who knows me knows I don't say praise very easily, right? So it's really I think it's an incredible, it's like, I would say it's almost an historic contribution to the dialogue, right? right? So it's well, I shouldn't say almost, it is a historic contribution to the dialogue, and I'm honored to have been part of the process, to be honest with you. So I did have a question. So to get down to questions, what would you say was the biggest challenge? I mean, you kind of outlined it. One was finding participants, right? And scheduling and whatnot. Maybe you could describe to us the process of ideation around, who you wanted to participate, why you chose this group of people, and how the process of recruiting and then eventually working with them unfolded. So it's 3 parts. What was your
Okay.
thinking behind it? Second part is why did you select these people? And then third part is what was it actually like to make it happen?
So as an international student, I had to understand who I had become. I mean, in 1999, just come from Ghana to Canada and then went to Peterborough. So that process for me, at that age taught me that I wasn't like everybody else. In Ghana, we're all brown, we're all colored. So I wasn't talking to Black women. I was talking to my sisters. In Canada, I was learning that I wasn't referred to as, oh, that woman. I was referred to as, oh, the Black woman, or the Black girl. So coming into MCM, even though for me, my focus was to learn a little bit more about communications and become a little bit more efficient, I felt that I needed to bring that history. The biggest challenge for me was blending that history, blending that desire to create an opportunity to tell that story with the essence and the whole concept of MCM. And so I also then had to find participants who had the same background as me, who were communications professionals and not just creatives, who were broadcast professionals so I could understand their storytelling, who were available to speak to me within the time frame that I needed to, but people who were doing something, and not just women who had an experience or a story to tell, but women who were doing something. And did you say the last part was the biggest challenge?
So how did it play out? Like
So how it played out, well, in my mind, it plays out like a challenge because having to find these women who are almost always at different time zones or in different places or working on major, big projects wasn't easy at all. Some of them were very gracious. They responded to my emails themselves. Some of them I had to go through their agents, through their publicists, etc. So the whole process was quite intense, but I really do appreciate it because when I did get to that point of interviewing them, I had quote unquote struggled to reach them so much that I had so much, to pour out. So yeah, being able to kind of pin them down, making sure that our time zones were aligned, making sure that they were available when I was. And as you can see, I started working on this project in 2022. In about January of 2022. Halfway through the year, I realized I'd bitten off more than I could chew, but I was adamant that if this had never been done for MCM, that I would set the pace because communications is really about storytelling. And you will find there'll be more people like me, more media, journalistic, storytellers, professionals like me who want to learn how to be better at communicating, if I may put it that way. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. I really wanted you to bring out the enormity of the challenge, and that was involved in putting this together. I was with you all along, and really, you were relentless, right? So good for you.
Alex, maybe just because of time, can we go to Dave and then
I actually had one more
come
question.
back?
I had one more question. So when it came to the actual questionnaire, how did you find the interviews unfolded? Right? Did you find that you stuck to the mandated questionnaire that you had, or how'd that go?
that went, again, one of my major challenges, because I had a list of 14 questions, standard questions for all of them, categorized in the three research questions that I shared. But I realized, when I sent the questions, each of them had certain aspects of their lives they kind of wanted to bring to the fore. Not all their experiences were alike. And this is the first thing that they kind of each pointed out to me. Yes, indeed, we're all Black, etc., but we don't all have the same backgrounds. We may have the same reasons for why we do what we do, but not the same background. So I also had to go back and kind of fine tune those questions a little bit in order for it to suit the purpose of not just my research, but also their desire to be open and transparent about their experiences and their work.
Great, thank you for that.
Okay, Dave. Thanks, Alex.
So Anita, Dr. Deverell in your interviews talked about chipping away at where we're at to get to somewhere. And then Tanya William, I think her name, Tanya William,
yeah,
talked about she's basically been running Real World since 2000. So there's been a lot of chipping away. And you talk about the storytelling and how they're using that to affect change. What in the interviews, what is the end, or is there ever an end? What is the goal of all the change as part of this process, do you think?
I think the goal is in what the next generation of Black women will describe to be their experience, the chipping away and the creating opportunities. The goal is never for these individual women to see the change, as it is for the women coming after them to talk about the change that they benefited from, or the paths that have been, the trails that have been blazed, so to speak. I mean, today, Dave, on CBC, we're seeing so many more projects, television projects around people of color. It's good to see. And this is as a result of the work of individuals like Tanya Williams, individuals like Dr. Deverell. So the ultimate goal will be to see how Black women, the ones coming after us even now, are accessing places that perhaps I couldn't access, or Dr. Deverell couldn't, or Tanya couldn't.
Yeah. And I think you sort of answered my question then, that they're starting to see successes then. Yeah.
Yes, slow, definitely slow, but when you speak to a lot of Black female directors now, perhaps also arguably because social media provides that space where people can reach an audience without having to go through the traditional channels of broadcast media. But ultimately, women are increasingly beginning to feel that the world is listening to them, and organizations and networks, etc., are giving them space to show their work, and that they're also able to showcase their culture and tradition through their work a little more easily now than before.
Okay, thank you. And it's interesting, it's at the same time, there's a parallel going on. I don't know if you're not in the Toronto area, but there's radio ads now for the lack of diversity in the film industry, but from a technical and trade standpoint. So it's across the industry, we're starting to see this.
And thanks, David, for mentioning that. That's one of the elements of the next two interviews that I haven't showcased in this, but they're coming from behind the scene, from the technical aspect, and the fact that, exactly as you said, there's a lack in diversity in that. And for us to be able to share the wealth, so to speak, to hire each other, we also need to up our game with access, or, when it comes to access to more technical training, etc.
And I know we're running out of slow on times, Terry, but I have one more. So so you talk about releasing this online, but do you have a partner, like a broadcast partner for this as well as of yet? No?
Not at all. I mean, this is a passion project that literally started from that moment when I started my MCM and I said, I'm going to turn this into something. So as I speak to you, it's all a work in progress.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well done.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. So I would talk to you just briefly beforehand. I saw a clip from a CBC Direct documentary in the 80s, and then an NFB document on Claire Preto in terms of the work that she'd been done. and the video or the documentary was called Some Black Women in 1975. And so it's, it's interesting that, yes, changes have been made, but, not enough, and systemic barriers still in place. What do you believe, that George Floyd moment during the pandemic, has that helped to break those barriers, or, did they break temporarily and then we're back into that kind of, okay, the barriers are there. They're not permanent. They were just temporal at that time.
Terry, the answer to your question is, for me, the biggest concern I have with the concept of a DEI specialist, because I feel that it solves that initial guilt, if I may put it that way, of having to ensure that we're talking about diversity, having to ensure that we are inclusive. So what George Floyd did is it kind of scratched the surface for every organization and individual, every community, to start being a little bit more conscious about the essence of, fighting for or fighting for justice or raising our voices, etc. Now, when Black Lives Matter Canada, Black Lives Matter, etc. I mean, when all those movements started, I humbly say that people started to become a little bit more conscious. And on the other side, they wanted to prove that indeed they have been listening. We've been listening to people of color for many years. So now we're going to give them a space. But that happened out of needing everyone to just be quiet. It didn't happen out of understanding what the essence of Black people truly is and what it is that they're looking for. So my question is, or my response to that question is, I felt it just got everyone to sit up. But beyond sitting up, everyone has to, as I said, as you saw my first slide, listen a little bit more to the needs of Black people, because it's not simply about giving opportunities, no, because one person can be given an opportunity and that won't even be nearly enough. That person has to also be given agency. That empowerment has to have the ability to empower other people, agency to make choices for themselves, as it perhaps as it supports the cultural, traditional, however you want to put it. So George Floyd got all of us to listen, but now we actually have to put the reality of who we are, what we want, that essence of inclusivity into understanding each other. And then hopefully that makes it easier for people coming after us to not have to fight so much to access the space that they're looking to access.
Great. Okay, just for time's sake, we're going to end with one round of questions. I'm going to put those that are here that are not part of the panel into a breakout room. So we'll come back to you. We'll close the room and come back to you once we have our decision. Thanks a lot, Anita. Really appreciate it. Okay, hold on.